going to now share my board. And Jason, do you want to take it away?
Absolutely. So I've got lots of questions here, and I'm hoping we can have lots of contribution. But in the first topic, collaborative learning in hybrid environments, the one thing I've been wanting to ask for a really long time to people that are still practicing and still working within higher education is how effective has your learning management system been in supporting hybrid learning during the last 18, 24 months of just what is complete chaos with COVID. I think I'll start with Sharon on this one, because I know Sharon has some views. I know Tyrone has some views as well. What do you think we can be doing better? What can we learn? What can we make or change from our learning teaching ecology?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. Thanks. I think what we've noticed is that the students want to learn in a different style, and so some of our traditional learning management systems are still in the whole put some content up, watch this video, now read this, even to the point where, there's still some old discussion forums, and certainly I'm studying myself again, and it's the same layout as we've had for many, many years. We have amazing learning designers that are doing creative and new things, but we've really noticed the difference of the social learning and the way that the students like to learn and be more collaborative and be part of that progression. So our teachers have really grabbed Microsoft Teams, and the reason why that's been successful is because of the way the students, even GIFs, just having GIFs to communicate with is just made such a huge difference. And now they're using the older learning management systems structures with the social collaborative learning piece, and now doing a lot of work on pulling that together so that we've got the best of both worlds. So that's certainly what I've noticed.
Awesome. Now, Tyrone, I know you've spent a lot of time with learning technologies in general. What are you hearing? I mean, I know you're in a slightly different role now, but what are you hearing from faculty just in general?
Look, I'll marry the two areas together in this response. I think that hybrid environment that we're now in, where it's not just one place to get the content, it's multiple apps that the teachers are using, and the synergy between those is becoming highlighted as a really important feature. I think there's a security element to all of that as well. Authentication and passing through those credentials in a safe manner is really important for us also. I think that's where a lot of the disruption and the reflection is happening. It's okay, the LMSs of the past have met a need, but now we're in this new realm that offers so much more value. Where do we go to from here?
Awesome. Excellent. So with that, and you actually touched on a point, this hybrid sort of distributed place that we're in, and the way people are working together is fundamentally different, and therefore what students are looking for is changing as well. There's something I've really wanted to ask Craig and Akshat, because they come from that corporate experience of a distributed workplace, and I've been wanting to ask this for quite some time, but how do you build effective teams, collaborative teams, in a distributed environment? What are some of the tools that you can provide educators from your experience in working in big corp that could in fact have dividends in this hybrid learning and teaching that we found ourselves in?
So I think you've got to go back a little bit in time and look to see environments where distributed collaborations have been taking place for generations. And if you go to the trading floor with global portfolios, and portfolios are handed over from financial centers, those relationships are built in a 2D environment. I think when you try and transpose that into an academic environment, you have to look at two paradigms, and one is the prescriptive education and the collaborative education, and what you're trying to achieve in that space. I think prescriptive education has not changed an awful lot since the tape recorder was portable, and you'd have 160 people in an amphitheater listening to a law lecture, and at the end of the semester there were 30 of them there with 130 tape recorders. I don't think that's any different now with Zoom, and I don't think that was different prior to the pandemic. I think that what we have to look at in order to build collaboration is the experience and how you enhance that experience and how you use the hybrid environment with the traditional environment to enhance collaboration. And there are very small nudges that we see now where you have a lecture, but within that lecture you have a breakout group, which is a quasi-tutorial. And you form small relationships within those tutorials, within each lecture, and then you start building that water cooler experience that you have in the corporate environment, but you have this now in a collaborative space. I think that it's inhibited by the pace of the advancement of the technology, so the platforms that we're using, and the fact that it's very clunky, the fact that there is so much choice, and it's ripe for disruption with new entrants coming in and adding this app and that app. I think when you do your orientation within a university, you get orientation on how to behave and how to what yes means and what no means, but you don't have orientation in how to use a platform, and there is no synergy there. And I think that there's a huge advantage in having familiar systems or languages whereby you go from one institution to another institution, and that skill set is transferable. You don't want to have, philosophers and artists being experts at technology, but not experts at philosophy. So the platform shouldn't be the overriding experience.
So with that action, so I know you work in a big company like I do. You obviously work across geos with people. If you were to teach a teacher how to build a team across borders using technologies like Teams, Zoom, whatever it is that you want to use, what's some advice that you would have?
Interaction, experience, focus on the experience and content. Content is pretty key in engagement, and prescriptive content can be boring. And the challenge that we have now is it's the same challenge that education has faced for a long time. And it's that what is the transactional cost of the student? Why are they there? What are they trying to attain? And how do you gain and enhance that experience so that they can maximize that experience and you can get the outcome that you're looking for, which is, an informed, enlightened cohort. And that's exactly the same in a corporate environment, whereby you have to use the same organizational behavioral tools, but within a 2D environment. And your challenge is, how do I make that exciting? How do I make that engaging? How do you do that? As you always have done, build relationships, have activities that build relationships, and not activities that, hang on, I haven't used this device or app or plugin before, and now I'm on a backseat.
That's a good point, Craig. I'm just keen to hear your thoughts as well, actually. What are you finding when speaking with a lot of pirate customers in the industry, and what are your own thoughts on what's happening?
I think Craig responded to that question quite beautifully. But I suppose to add to that, I think collaboration has historically been a means to an end. It no longer is. I think the whole experience dimension is become quite critical. In the corporate context, it has a huge make or break impact on retention and engagement. First, compared to whatever the net impact of collaboration or intended impact of collaboration is, and that is an immediate risk to the business. Being able to retain or lose staff in a market like ours, where finding the right talent with the right skill set is quite challenging. In the university context, we're finding similar challenges that apply both to staff but also to students. So in fact, in some ways, our experience or our challenges are magnified in the university context, where systems, technologies, if they do not suffice, students in particular go rogue and find workarounds that have other impacts on things like cybersecurity, reputational risks, strategic risks, operational risks, costs associated for universities. So I don't know if that answers the question, but in some ways, I do not envy the position that a CIO finds himself in, where on one hand, they have to balance all of that, but on another, they also need to demonstrate value internally to retain staff where there are such immense pressures on cost reduction.
Awesome. I'm just looking at the chat here, and David, you've got some key points and that you've made in the chat. Would you mind just explaining or sharing with us what are you looking to do at your own institution? For those who don't know David's from Republic Polytechnic in Singapore, and I've had the privilege of working with David over the last year or so. And yeah, David, I wouldn't mind hearing your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sulabh. Yeah, so I'm just one of those guys in the AI domain, and we also kind of click and test things out in RP. And what we're finding is that, like I mentioned in the chat, I think LMSs are really old school. We have one, actually we have more than one. We have like 3 or 4 different LMSs that we use. But it's really getting up to a point whereby, like, I think, it's just measuring clicks and all that, like Chris is mentioning over there, and not really measuring the student engagement and the experience. So what we're really trying to do is look at systems, AI, adaptive systems that will allow us to get into the measuring of the engagement within the activities that happen in a classroom or in a hybrid environment, and really see how that is affecting the process, right? And we know that, yeah, although we want to see results quickly, it's not going to happen. We really need to see it as a system approach. If you're doing engineering and you just take a page from that, you have the processes that you put in place, and over time the outcomes occur. And very often in an LMS, we just want to see, oh, students are clicking this and finishing that and accomplishing this on the system, but it doesn't actually mean they're learning anything, right? It just means that they're completing the task. So we really need to get out of this wanting to see immediate results and just to measure the effectiveness of the experience and the process. And we can do that, and we are not rushing to see results overnight, then I really think that we will be able to change the outcomes if we just have faith in the system.
Which actually raises a really good point. How do we measure student success moving forward? What are some of the concrete ways that we should be identifying students at risk, for example, versus students who are being successful, so that we can somehow either intervene or provide, guidance, or potentially, recognize students who are doing well? I know this is an area, I know micro-credentialing and analytics and things like that are we're all interested in that, but I know Sharon has some ideas around student success. So I might start with Sharon, but then also maybe lead to some of the other panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Being in vocational sector, that's a really challenging question for us, definitely. How do you measure competence even? But measuring students, and that's always up for debate and around what actually makes a student competent at a task, at a work task. And that, no one can agree on that really. But measuring student success, I agree. How do we do that? And I'm really interested to hear what David was talking about there as well. We tend to look at, completions. That's not really a very good measurement, but that certainly gives us an idea where we can, across the state now, we have a statewide view. That's a really good way of picking up any flags, certainly in a course or an assessment. Like when I was teaching TAE last financial year, I could tell when the students hit a specific assessment that, that assessment was terrible, and I lost students at that point. So things like that can really affect it. What we really noticed once we had to pivot immediately to online was it instantly became aware where our most vulnerable students were, that had like one device between a family of 10, things like that really affected how they could engage, and also really struggled with some of the technology. So the being able, measuring student success is a challenge. I don't have the answer clearly, but we're certainly looking at all of those. I agree that the adaptive learning and the number of clicks and that it's one piece of the puzzle, but it needs a very holistic view to make sure that we are doing the best for the students. And that I always think engagement's the first place my head goes to, is definitely engagement as a measure.
Yep. You actually raised a really interesting point, something that I'm sure most of the panelists know that I'm quite passionate about, is equitable access to education. And most importantly, as we move to this digital, or at least hybrid space, the digital divide is quite real. And we've seen that both in K-12, but also in higher education. Even some of our top higher education institutes are noting that, students are really struggling financially to keep up with the needs that they have for technology. So what can we be doing better? Does anyone have any ideas around, and I might pass this over to maybe Craig or Tyrone to think of, what are some solutions that are equitable, but also going to drive change and transformation in higher education?
I think it's difficult or challenging to look at an age-old problem, which is, how do you measure output? How do you measure the succinct nature and whether you're meeting your targets in educating or providing whatever you're trying to do with the individual. And I think that we confuse the 2D space, with that, and that's a bigger question. And I think the question is, how do you use the hybrid environment to enhance that experience? Not necessarily, and how would you measure that outcome, that you have actually had an impact? Because the danger is that you say, oh, we tried this and it didn't have an impact. When you look at what you did previously, it didn't have an impact either. So, in measuring, the consultancies will be better at this. But in measuring anything, you collect data, and one of the things that universities, and I think we'll come to this later, fail at is using the resource that they have and becoming a data-driven business. And by becoming a data-driven business, that the data engineer and the domain expert works closely together in content providing, in facilities management, in everything, that you're not going to know the full story. So I think how do you measure it? You collect data, reflect, review.
Data is a very interesting point, and I know that, Akshat, you work with a lot of institutions, and that may be something that you're interested in. So what is it that we need to have as a higher education institution before we can even think about measuring? Is it something that you're working on in terms of data lake strategy, or is there anything that you're hearing that universities are moving towards in terms of a unified data model, or something that can be shared across institutions as well?
I think that the data lake strategy is definitely a growing trend across universities. It is a common response, but I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution. I think TAFE's different from UTS, is different from Newcastle, is different from University of Sydney, and I think what is tricky is about trying to balance the unique personality, culture, what the universities, what their name to fame is or should be, with the baseline level of data collection, operations, management, policies, procedures, and student experience. Now, I think what is frightening though is the pace at which the shift is happening. I think there is a general hesitance to move quickly, because I think less so the CIOs, but perhaps more the deputy vice chancellors and academic community aren't quite sure about how much of today is the new normal versus how much would be returned back to how things were pre-2020. So I think there's hesitance to make big investments in creating data lakes, for example, even if it's the right answer today, because we sort of want to see how the next 6 months play out. But the unfortunate thing is that the next 6 months may present new challenges, and there's always the danger of falling back and falling behind, I suppose.
Interesting. Yeah, that I've just noticed Craig has his hand up, but yeah, I'd be interested to see where things go. Or are the commitments that we're seeing from universities or higher education in general about improving student success and data retention, and also looking at identifying students at risk? Are these trends transitory? Is this something that's going to disappear once we go back to face, or is there a sustainable long-term vision that we can actually all work towards achieving? That to me is, like you, it's a question mark. I actually don't know the answer to that. With that, Craig, what is your feedback on that? I know you've raised your hand.
I think that you've got to look at Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO of JP Morgan. Has been pushing this come back to work. You can't transfer information unless we're all standing around a water cooler together, and all this sort of stuff. And I think that when you look at leaders within this space, within the education space, they have been educated and they have bias based on their background and the way they were mentored, the way they grew, and they're not stupid people, so they can see the evolution, but that pace of evolution might be a lot slower. And when you're in large organizations, you tend to look internally rather than externally, and change is slow. But disruption accelerates that pace. So micro-credentialing and things like that, have an impact, and you have to rely on your reputation as your competitive advantage, because cost point is not one of them. However, in saying that, how do you influence leadership to see that a hybrid system, so a combination of both, is enhancing the experience, is creating a better environment with better outcomes for the potential that it's fostering, as in the student cohort. And I think it's that realization, and without a shadow of a doubt, that every leadership group within every institution, university institution, hope for the best and plan for the best. And if they'd have hoped for the best and planned for the worst, they would all have a digital offering now that they could monetize.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Just sort of changing tracks, I'm just cognizant of time. Beyond the physical classroom, beyond the digital classroom, what other gaps in higher education do you think need to be filled before we can achieve, true transformation? There's so much out there, so many conversations, so many things happening in the learning and teaching space in general. But what else needs to be done? Tyrone, I know you look after a lot of the infrastructure side of things. What else needs to be thought about before we can achieve any level of true sustainable transformation for either student success or student engagement?
That's an interesting one. I'm just reflecting on your earlier question around equality for the student, and I think our traditional approach of leveraging existing content hasn't really helped with this mobile first customer base that we have. Students are being served a different experience when they come and study as opposed used to in their day-to-day. So I think that's an area that really needs to be looked at. From a device perspective too, I think historically we've relied on the end compute power, and I think that's becoming less and less through the adoption of web. So I think there's a few areas there that we probably need to address, like the fundamentals, and shaping our learning content around that. What I'm also interested in is, and this is pretty close to heart right now, is acknowledging the stagnant, antiquated learning content, or the tendency for it to be quite outdated very fast. And when you have this sort of set and forget approach to building that learning content, you end up with a disengaged audience, I feel, and we're back in that sort of circle now, I think, with the micro learning approach, building content that's small, and it's relevant, I think is really important. So I'll leave it there.
It's actually a really interesting topic about, and it was going to be one of my questions for the efficiency side of things, because in my experience, and I'd love to actually hear Akshat's experience on this as well in transformation projects, but I find the traditional models of learning design where we invest very, very heavily in content curation actually prevents, in many regards, at scale transformation of an institution, because you cannot scale the amount of effort that's required to uplift a single subject or a new offering. I'd love to hear from your experience in working with transformation projects because of how complex they are, Akshat. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you have any thoughts around how we can do things better rather than focusing just on content?
I suppose there are two thoughts. One is I don't know if there is another avenue other than content to focus on, but what I can perhaps say is the manner in which we focus on content can perhaps change. I think the universities that are a little bit further along have made content development and improvement an always on feature and federated that rather than sort of dedicate effort, if that makes sense. So everyone, including students, are responsible for ensuring that the collective learning experience and the quality of content that is being taught is being improved. And there are ways to do that by ensuring the classrooms are equipped with the right technology, the right level of prep is happening before and after, the course delivery, the follow-ups go up on time, etc. So that is one aspect of it. The second is what cannot be underinvested in or appreciated is the need to also look at testing and examinations. Often where things stall in terms of shifting the way content is delivered and taught is how students will ultimately be assessed. There is a great pivot towards testing the traditional way. So bringing students into a lab, even if it's a CBT, socially distancing them and making sure that they test. Now, I think that's where things break down, because that is a point in time exercise. If you shift the content development, improvement, life cycle into a continuous loop, there is no reason why testing has to be calendar based. So to marry those two up and do it with some degree of flexibility to shape ourselves for the new norm rather than pivot back to the traditional way of testing, I think will deliver a tremendous impact, and not just on a statewide scale, but on a national scale, because we are the sector itself is a huge contributor to the country's GDP, and we are losing out to other geographies who open their borders first, for example. So there is an opportunity here to create a new learning and testing way of doing things to be the world leaders in education.
That's a really interesting topic, is digital examination and hybrid examination. And I would love to ask Sharon her thoughts on different modes of assessment that may in fact either replace, enhance, or ultimately transform the way that we look at examination.
You knew to ask me, you knew, Jason. I was sitting there going, pick me, pick me, pick me. Yeah, I love that shit. And I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. Jason probably knows, because I had a little rant on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, because my daughter's doing a HSC and she's telling me how she has to, memorize quotes and things. And I'm like, why on earth in English exams in the HSC are they still not allowed to take in a prescribed text? There is no need for memorizing this stuff. But then I can't just point the finger at the HSC. We're the same. I've just spent a month putting together a trial, a field trial implementation plan for proctoring, exam proctoring, and I'm trying to scratch my head and think, why? Why do we need to sit there and assess that a student doesn't take their eyes off a screen or doesn't look at a book? How is that relevant to what we do in the workplace and the skills we need? So we absolutely need to relook at that. And during COVID, we saw, not only because last year and then at the start of this COVID spike, I'm getting excited, I know, we saw that, you know, straight away we went to what content can we deliver online? But this second push made us really have to crack into how can we continue to assess in this climate, and that's where we really got challenged, especially for some of our, you know, traditional trade areas and that. And the teachers did incredible, and it was always those teachers that just became so creative. We just provided the tools. We had, you know, one of the hospitality teachers ended up with a phone, a body cam we called it, where they had the phone with the teacher patched in through Teams, actually seeing what the student was seeing and getting them to prepare a coffee. And the teacher was live in there going, now can you show me how you're going to do the next part? And how, okay, I see some milk on the bench, you know, how long is that got to be, when's that got to be back in the fridge? Just all of these things that were so very relevant. And that, how do we do that on scale? I think the scale of it is always the challenge. We know how to do proper authentic assessment. We just need to be able to do it at scale.
Awesome.
So I'll get off my soapbox now. Jason.
No, I totally agree, and it's definitely a pain point that we need to solve for. I actually want to ask Craig, because I know that in programs of study like MBA programs, for example, they do tend to use far more authentic means of assessment to try and replicate real world experiences. I know from University of Sydney, Professor Guy Ford, who is there, has some very interesting ways of looking at assessment in accounting, for example. And now, Craig, what are your thoughts? How should we be assessing students moving forward?
Again, it's very situational. You know, a prescriptive environment where the anatomy hasn't changed an awful lot, you know, is going to be very different than somebody in a creative thinking or nature of systems environment. You know, in terms of the lab component of learning, you know, there's a lot of digital platforms there, particularly in management science, that enables and facilitates that. You know, in terms of the MBA program that I'm on, it's very different than, say, the one at Harvard or Yale, which is sort of an analyst type of old school MBA. This is a creative MBA to encourage thought and thought leadership and looking at problems and solving problems very differently. So I think the relevance of what we're doing in this environment is somewhat unique and probably not applicable, you know, on a scalable environment. You know, the groups are small. But what I do know is that, you know, with a diverse group in 10 different countries, 8 different time zones, you know, working in a distributed environment, you know, on the program, the collaboration and experience of working with each other in a tutorial type environment is far, far more productive than being broadcast to. And micro management of a lecture is probably the way to go to get a more insightful outcome, as in you talk about a subject and then you go into groups and maybe there's teacher assistants or PhD students in there to guide the discussion within those groups. So, you know, I don't know whether that answers the question, but it all comes down to enhancing that experience.
I mean, if I could add to that, and I was a student of Guy Ford, Jason, just so you know, I did my MBA not too long ago, and you know, one of the things that I greatly appreciated as part of that new program was that experiential learning aspect of it. We didn't have any textbooks throughout the course, which is a revolutionary thing for any leading institution to do, and it was all about repetitions and all about learning from others' experiences. And I learned a lot from that, you know, whether it's accounting or finance, or whether it's things like business negotiations and you know, things of that nature. So yeah, I agree with Craig with what you just said then as well. I wouldn't mind getting anybody's thoughts really on if you found any good examples of using learning analytics to inform the you know, the student experience, and whether it's in the whether it's to do with assessments or whether it's to do with student engagement. Keen to hear everybody's thoughts on whether you've come across good examples of using data to inform that a positive student experience. David, do you mind sharing what you're looking to do in this sort of space? Putting you on the spot there, sorry.
To measure student experience, I think that's the toughest thing, right? So we went through like a whole year of playing around with AI solutions and the measurement of students, and we really did the research, right? We got them to actually get into focus groups and tell us what is it that makes the experience engaging, and we still haven't really come to it. We did manage to know that it has a lot to do with autonomy, for example, giving students that space to chart their own path and get their own stuff going within the learning environment. The one thing that we're looking at now, I would say, would be to do with, I think in the chat, it talks about design and scaling. And in order to scale any experience, the peer assessment bit has to come in, the collaboration bit. So if we can combine the affordance of technology to allowing students to get that critical thinking going by looking at a peer's work and being able to not be forced to, but saying, look, as part of your learning, take a look at your friend's work and give your feedback. And that's really where the critical thinking comes in, not the outcome. I don't really care if you master the skills in one day, because that's not really where we are coming from, but that you're able to help another student or teach another student, and if we can measure that. And very often what we have found out is that when a student is able to get so involved that they're giving effective critique to a peer, they feel as though they are in it, they own it, and they feel good that they're able to help someone. And that's the kind of engagement, the intrinsic motivation that we're looking at. And again, not because we're forcing them to, but because they just, the structure is there, they're being encouraged to do so, and that's the kind of experience that we're looking to measure.
Thanks, David. Chris, you have your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, look, thanks very much. Look, I agree with everything you just said, David. That fantastic. One of the issues that I think we face when we're looking at scale is when we're informing our academics of what students think. And we, at the end of a teaching period, or even during it, we are saying, oh, this is some feedback from your students. We don't highlight that students actually have different needs as they're doing their learning. We know that some of our very best academics do think that way and understand the diversity and the inclusive way that they can conduct their teaching. But at the minute, we're not following through in the way that we articulate back. We just say, oh, here's the student feedback to you. You need to improve on this next time. We need to be very clear that international students are going to have different needs to domestic, are going to have different needs based on their socioeconomic background, the distance that they have to travel to get to the university, the technological skills that they have coming into the unit, so the pathways that they have. We need that information to go to our academics, our teachers, so that when they are strategically looking at planning, when they've got that time to take a breath, they're able to sit there and say, okay, I'm doing this piece of work which I suspect is going to help that group of students, and I'm going to be thinking proactively about that from day one. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point about how do we visualize it, or how do we get that data to end academics or educators so that they have a very clear picture of the students that they have in their classrooms, I guess. I would love to unpack that just as a separate conversation to see what it is that we can be doing with data to visualize that, either through obviously insights or other tools, because I agree, as an educator, knowing who I have and what their needs are would be incredibly empowering as an educator.
Mm-hmm. Just conscious of time, would love to discuss and get feedback from everybody on how we can save, like how we can do more and save time for academics and staff. I'm not sure, Tyrone, do you have any examples that you could share with us that you've experienced at TAFE New South Wales around what sort of steps you've taken to save time?
Ooh, to save time. There's been a few initiatives that haven't really got over the line to date around automation, provisioning of accounts, groups into various realms. But I think over time that'll gain momentum, as it's a very fundamental piece of architecture that needs to be addressed. This current approach of ad hoc on request creating memberships to groups is just unsustainable. I think also what flows from that as well in our environment particularly is device management and moving away from that environment where the software was deployed to the machine, but rather the new one where the software follows the user. I think that's quite a very efficient way, amongst many other benefits, but very efficient way from an ICT perspective. And I think it also just enhances that learner experience. You know, the fact that a student in that environment could go to a library and grab a device and sign in, and everything that they need is there. It's a stark contrast to what we're currently providing.
Awesome. Actually, do you have any examples to share in this sort of space? Any?
I was actually going to ask actually the same thing. Like, is there anything in terms of what you're hearing through the vertical as a whole about efficiency or systems or integrations or things that are being thought through to save fundamentally teachers and educators time?
I don't know if there's a silver bullet. I'd love to know what it is, because then that just makes my job a lot easier in terms of providing advice. I think the recurring challenge, and again, for people who I think have put more runs on the board in this area, particularly the IT teams, have created scale and agility by revisiting their enterprise architecture framework. So not just the landscape of everything, but how enterprise architecture flexibility is managed. The reason that is increasingly critical is that bad word, or the bad term called shadow IT, which is a thing of the past, is now increasingly becoming what Gartner predicted, which is business-led IT, in this case, academic-led IT. So it cannot be underestimated how much academics know about possible solutions that can create scale and agility. The challenge is our flexibility as IT teams to allow for the integration of those new solutions, simple things like time and attendance management, into the ecosystem of solutions that we already offer, in a manner that allows for the shaping up of the overall portfolio of apps and infrastructure over the 2-3 year period as needed. So nothing is set in stone, but it is important for us to allow for people to put up their requests, their business cases, ideas, what have you, and quickly assess those ideas for architecture fitment, make those possibilities happen, and over time rationalize or retire these solutions. I think that scale and agility aspect is incredibly crucial.
Yeah, awesome. I couldn't agree more, and I know that Craig has a comment, but I also, after Craig's finished, want to throw to Tyrone as somebody who looks after some of the security aspects and thinking of, how do we do this in a responsible and secure and safe way of having a shadow IT, but also empowering, academics, to experience and experiment with technologies. But I'll start off with you, Craig. I know you had your hand up.
So I'll go a little bit left field. There's very large similarities between education and the chemical industry and the disruption the chemical industry is going through there. So I would say have a quick read on disruption in the chemical industry, and it will give you a few pointers. But certainly the efficiency of the 4.0 office sort of environment, will alleviate, or potentially could alleviate, if you can get synergy within systems. However, I really think that in terms of time management and allowing educators to educate, in this environment, in a hybrid environment, rests on content. And the educators are spending so much time generating content, that if there was a universal content platform that they could draw from, then they would be so much more efficient for them to be able to conduct breakout tutorials within groups, rather than spending so much time on content and so much time on marking, particularly in creative sciences, where you have to pay a lot of attention to the assessment and what's been presented to you. So I really think we need to reframe education in its delivery, and how to digitize that delivery to free up time for educators to educate and not spend 45, 55, 65% of their time creating content.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to come back to that whole idea of content, and whether or not there's a more structured approach to learning design versus, as you said, spending a lot of time. I know Sharon put in open education resources as an opportunity there as well. But just going back to the security piece, and Tyrone, as somebody who works for a very, very large organization, very complicated organization with thousands and thousands of educators who are most likely experimenting with all sorts of cool technologies that Sharon has shown them via her messaging. How do you do this in a responsible, sustainable way that doesn't, grow out of control, or makes sure that, TAFE New South Wales is still in compliance with its data being in the right places?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. And on the earlier point made around shadow IT and the drivers for shadow IT, I think we need to ensure that we're providing our teachers, our students, with tools that meet their requirements. So there's no draw away from our ecosystem or our supported platforms. Another component is, we're regularly onboarding third-party apps into our environment, and what we're starting to observe now is, a lot of those vendors are actually leveraging Microsoft 365 accounts as an authentication means. And from a technical perspective at the back end, like once we've done the procurement activity and we've got the safeguards in place to ensure that the data's not going offshore, or it's on Australian soil as required by our bodies. And the data, the personal identifiable information at rest is encrypted, and all those sort of safeguards. The actual technical component of onboarding that vendor, using Microsoft 365, great, we'll leverage that. We'll send them to single sign-on, we'll send them to MFA. It's a half-hour activity, whereas in the past it was a major, architectural feat. So I think two parts to that. We need to provide our delivery environment staff and students with the tools that they actually need. They're not going elsewhere, and also when we're onboarding these tools, we're looking for the path of least resistance for onboarding.
Awesome. Just conscious of time, and Tyrone, I echo your sentiments. We are a vendor. We are implementing apps on Teams as well, and definitely aligned with what you're thinking there as well. We have only 5 minutes remaining. What I'd like to do is just wrap up by getting really everybody's views on, what would be the key message that you'd like everybody to take away. I'll give we'll start with Craig. Do you have any key messages you'd like to share with everybody?
Oh, wow, you put me on the spot there. I would say that approach everything in a sense of saying, how might we, as opposed to we must. How might we provide education in a different environment? How might we engage in experiential learning in a different environment? So just approach everything, how might we, and open your mind.
Sharon, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I can springboard off what Craig just said to finish off, I think. And I think not only have our students seen what's possible, the teachers now know what's possible, and that challenges those older notions of we have to have the students on site to do an exam. They have to be on site to do that. Our teachers have to be on campus so we know they're working. All of that's just been pushed aside, and it's like, well, hang on a minute, no, we don't. So I think challenging those things is really what we can do as well.
Absolutely. Tyrone?
Yeah, okay. I think the old world of ICT and delivery being siloed groups working separately has come to an end. I think the customer, the student, is the sole focus now, and those two groups need to work together to address those needs.
Awesome. Akshat?
I'm going to struggle to say something that already hasn't been said because everyone's put it across quite beautifully. But I just think that the expiry date on our ability to experiment is going to come up pretty quickly. So I think we need to make the most of this gift that we realized quite late into the pandemic we have, which is disrupting the normal as it was. So I would urge everyone to just take yourselves up on that, take your organizations up on that, and use the excuse of strategic, reputational, operational risks to accelerate transformations, I'd say.
Awesome. Thank you, Akshat. We're almost out of time, so I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody, especially Sharon, Akshat, Craig, and Tyrone for sharing your views and for participating so generously in today's discussion. A massive thanks to everybody else as well on the chat, and David and others as well who participated in the discussion today. We really enjoyed that. Massive thanks to you, Jason, for facilitating today's discussion. You're awesome. You know that. I don't need to tell you that, but I'd mention anyway. Before we finish up, I'd just like a minute of your time to answer a couple of quick polls that'll be coming up on your screen shortly. The purpose of these polls is just to get very quick feedback on today's discussion and see what topics were of most interest to you, and it'll help us plan for the following events as well. So please do take your time to complete the polls. And for those who done, this is it. Thank you so much for coming along today and for participating in today's discussion. We barely touched the surface, and I know there's a lot to discuss there, but we appreciate everybody's time, and we'll be in touch shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.